The US and Russia are currently trying to join forces in the Middle East after Europe refused to send its troops to help America. Such a news headline would have seemed very wild and strange just a year ago, but not under Donald Trump. After the American president called Europe's refusal to go to war against Iran a big mistake and threatened the collapse of NATO, the Kremlin immediately offered Donald Trump its help. It got to the point where Moscow and Washington even started discussing the idea of imposing sanctions against Europe for refusing Trump's request to send their warships to unblock the Hormuz Strait. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is considering the risk of a nuclear incident as one of the possible scenarios for the development of the conflict in the Middle East. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. Like this video, leave any comment below, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Donald Trump continues to criticize the decision of European countries not to go to war against Iran, and Trump has once again started hinting that the US might eventually leave the North Atlantic Alliance altogether. Yesterday, US President Donald Trump stated that most of the US's NATO allies, contrary to his call, expressed their unwillingness to get involved in a military operation against Iran and described this as a serious mistake. He said this on Tuesday at a press conference in the Oval Office during the visit of Irish Prime Minister Michel Martin. Next is a quote from Donald Trump. "I think that NATO is making a very foolish mistake. Everyone agrees with us that it is necessary to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, but they don't want to help, and we, as the United States, must remember this. Such a position from our allies shocks me. The response to my request for help became an excellent test of our partners. We don't need them, but they should have been there for us." Earlier, let me remind you, the President of the United States called on NATO countries to help unblock the Strait of Hormuz, a key maritime route, the movement through which has practically stopped due to Iran's attacks on tankers and attempts by Iranians to mine the channel. However, the response from a number of European countries turned out to be quite restrained. So, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated at the beginning of the week that his country would not be drawn into a large-scale war. And he suggested developing a viable collective plan to unblock the Strait of Hormuz in order to stabilize global oil tankers. The head of the German Ministry of Defense, Boris Pistorius, also rejected Trump's demands to send Navy warships to this region. He simply said, quote, "This is not our war, we didn't start it." Well, after such a refusal, Trump himself stated that he actually didn't ask for any help, it just seemed that way to all of you. Another quote, "Thanks to the US military successes in Iran, we no longer need or want help from other countries. We never needed that help." And later, Trump stated that he would once again consider the question of the US leaving NATO. And against this backdrop, the Russians, like real vultures, rushed to please Donald Trump and play along with his rhetoric, hoping that Trump would move closer as a result. Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for Investment and Economic Cooperation with Foreign Countries, or just an obscure person, Kirill Dmitriev, stated that the US should impose sanctions against its allies in Europe after they refused to help in the war against Iran. Next, I will quote Dmitriev. "Perhaps the US should impose sanctions against the United Kingdom and the European Union for their lack of reciprocity and for destroying Western civilization through immigration, as well as lift sanctions against Russia to support global energy companies." But it's interesting that Dmitriev apparently forgot here that Iran is actually their ally, and he's saying that the US should punish those who didn't want to fight with them against our ally. It sounds ridiculous, but listen, that's Russia for you. They never behave honestly or with dignity, and they're ready to sell out their ally for pennies just to save their own skin. Honor and dignity, and Russians in general, live on different planets. Russians don't know what honor and dignity are. Then this very Dmitriev noted that Washington's NATO allies support Ukraine, but not the United States of America, which is conducting a military operation against Iran. The special representative of the plush dictator Putin also posted a video in which American President Donald Trump criticizes the countries of the North Atlantic Alliance for refusing to take part in unblocking the Hormuz Strait, and he calls it a very rude, foolish mistake. Well, that's what we discussed earlier. And here it's important to understand the context, why Dmitriev got so worked up. Before that, Dmitriev promised that if sanctions against Russia were lifted, the US would get access to joint projects with a total value of over $14 trillion. At the same time, he claimed that the restrictions against Moscow cost Washington more than $300 billion, like they could have made money, but they didn't. Let me remind you, earlier The Economist wrote that Russia promised projects worth $12 trillion in exchange for lifting the sanctions. According to the publication's sources, during negotiations to end the war against Russia and against Ukraine, the Kremlin made offers to people close to Donald Trump's family. Shares in Russian energy assets, including projects for oil and gas extraction in the Arctic, the development of rare earth metal deposits, the creation of a data processing and development center with nuclear power supply, and the construction of a tunnel under the Bering Strait. Also, according to The Economist's sources, before the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in Alaska in August of last year, a memo was prepared for the Russian Security Council explaining how to present the American president with the greatest deal between Moscow and Washington in the economic sphere. And in this document, Russia described itself as a treasure trove of Arctic and northern resources, which supposedly dozens of sovereign and private funds from the US and other currently unfriendly countries would rush to develop. The memo also stated that everyone would make a lot of money and Presidents Putin and Trump could potentially receive Nobel Prizes. Well, that's how it was. Putin wanted to take credit here as well. But as you can see, essentially all that Russia can offer is resources. That's everything that's in the ground. Russians can't come up with anything using their brains. And in fact, for some reason, even before the war, Russians were offended when they were called just a gas station. So why be offended? But that's a fact, that's reality. You are just a simple gas station. If you take away the resources that Mother Earth gave you, you are nothing. You are nobody at all. You have nothing to offer the world. Well, even that Max Messenger that they have now, for some reason, Russians were very surprised why the Max Messenger identifies Crimea as Ukraine in its operating system. They were like, how is that possible? But this is a Russian sovereign messenger. So, the fact that it identifies Crimea as Ukraine shows that it uses completely Western technologies, and the entire interface is definitely Western. There's nothing Russian about it. But let's get back to Dmitriev and his statements. The calculation was that the young, headline-driven American president would be impressed and hear, wow, $14 trillion. And he would continue to pressure Kiev on the issue of a peace agreement on Ukraine because of the risk, of missing out on this trillion-dollar benefit in Russia. Well, of course, these trillions have absolutely nothing to do with reality. This is, as they say, a rough estimate of potential possible benefits, just to impress Donald Trump and keep his attention. Fortunately, Trump didn't fall for it so quickly. Well, let me remind you here that the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, also proposed to the US as part of the agreement to end the war in the Middle East to transfer enriched uranium reserves from Iran to Russia. Putin made this proposal to Donald Trump during their phone conversation on March 9th. Fortunately, the US president refused Putin's proposal. But as you can see, the Russians are still looking for any crack in the unity of the West so they can swoop in like vultures, like some kind of filth, and just beg Donald Trump to make any kind of cooperation deal with them. Meanwhile, the war in the Middle East could get out of control. It has been reported that the World Health Organization is considering the risk of a nuclear incident as one of the possible scenarios for the development of the conflict in the Middle East. UN staff are monitoring the consequences of strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and remain on high alert for radiation threats. The organization is updating instructions for staff in case of a nuclear incident, including recommendations on assessing health risks and measures to protect the population. In addition, Politico reports that the United States is discussing the risks of using nuclear weapons. Donald Trump's advisor on artificial intelligence, David Sachs, stated that he is concerned about the escalation of the conflict by Israel and the possible use of nuclear weapons. Trump himself rejected such an assumption and stated that Israel would not do that. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Also, if you found this episode interesting and useful, I would appreciate any financial support from you. It will help our channel grow. You can do this through donations, subscriptions, or sponsorship on YouTube. How to do this? All the links and details are in the description of this video, or you can use the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.